Good morning, everyone. I'm super excited to be here today to talk to you about managing apps here at Slack securely and at scale. My name is Salman Suhail, and I'm a group product manager here on the Slack platform team. And I'm super excited to also have today Vivian Pastel with me, a risk and security engineer here at Slack. In today's sessions, I'll break down app management across security, governance, and adoption and share relevant admin features that help you in each area. Meanwhile, Vivian will jump in throughout our time today and share some really amazing insights from Slack's security team on how we approach app management. But before we dive into those areas, I want to start off with why it's worth investing administrative time and effort into the Slack platform. For years, enterprise companies have steadily adopted a best-of-breed approach, selecting the best tool at hand rather than using bundled software. It's no surprise that the average enterprise now uses more than 1,000 different SaaS products, specialized across every function and vertical. This proliferation of apps is a good thing. Employees can get work done more efficiently. However, relying on email and browser tabs to access apps can be a drag on productivity. Users are stuck switching between apps and tracking down information across tools because most software simply doesn't work well together. This isn't just frustrating and distracting, but it results in a quantifiable loss in productivity. In our state of work research, 64% of workers say they spend at least 30 minutes a day just switching between various workplace apps and tools. In order to combat this challenge, companies are tasked with figuring out how to equip employees with ways to optimize and streamline app use and ultimately ensure they're maximizing their company's investment in these tools. And that's where Slack comes in. Slack connects all your tools in one place, making it easier to access and use them where you're already working. Teams are more productive when information is democratized and shared across tools, not tucked away in silos. Whatever tools you use, we want to make them available in Slack, whether they're built by one of our 690,000 developers or in-house by your team. At Slack, our platform mission is to provide you with the tools to get more value out of your existing software. Our co-founder and CEO, Stuart, says it best. We'd like to be the 2% of your software budget that's a multiplier on the other 98% of your budget. For you, that means Slack can not only up-level your team's collaboration with our channel-based messaging platform, but will also help you get more out of your existing software investments. With thousands of apps in the app directory, there's so much potential in bringing apps to your organization. We're here to help you build a strong foundation for managing apps so you can give users flexibility to integrate their tools, all while maintaining control over how they operate in your organization. I'll start by walking through three key components of app management: security, governance, and adoption, and share best practices along the way to apply at your organization. First, we have security, which I know is likely top of mind for a lot of you today. When it comes to security in Slack, it's critical to understand how Slack data is handled by apps and place guardrails accordingly that reflect your security posture. When evaluating apps, you're really looking to answer two questions: what Slack data is being shared and who gets access to that data. So let's start with that first question: what Slack data gets shared? Ultimately, your goal is to assess the permissions the app is requesting in your workspace. That's because apps can transform workflows in your organization, but also sometimes come at the cost of sharing data. Before improving or installing an app, it's important to understand the risks and the benefits of allowing certain permissions. At a high level, apps will request permissions to do three things in Slack: view information, post information, and perform actions. To put this in practice, let's start by unpacking what permissions the Jira Cloud app needs in order to function. Here you see an example of an engineering team swarming around a bug in an escalation channel. After Arcadio logs the bug, the Jira app posts back into the channel so that the full team has visibility into the issue. From there, any user in the channel has quick access to actions like watching or assigning the issue. The first example of permissions that powers the Jira app is access to view information. Here, the Jira app specifies that Arcadio created the bug, mapping the Jira user IDs back to Slack user IDs. In order to do this, the app needs permissions to view people in the workspace. By granting this permission, you can quickly see who created a bug and send them a message in Slack so that there's no need to take time to pull up Jira and search for those specific details. The second example of permissions an app might request is for the ability to post information. Here, the Jira Cloud app has posted in a channel just like Harry and Arcadio did. In order to do this, the app needs permissions to send messages as Jira Cloud. By granting this permission, your team can respond quickly to issues, relying on Jira's real-time alerts to mobilize the team where everyone's already working. The last example of permissions an app might request is for the ability to perform an action in Slack. Here, the Jira app allows users to take actions on a notification right from Slack, like watching the issue, assigning it to someone, or commenting on it. By granting this permission, users can save time on repetitive tasks. There's no need to open up Jira, search for an issue, and assign it to a person. All of that can be done in a few clicks right from Slack, while also maintaining Jira as the source of truth for everything that's happening. That was just a snapshot of what you can look out for, but there are a lot of permissions that are available to apps. You can review them all at api.slack.com/scopes to learn more about what they do. As you think about what apps to install, you can rely on this authorization page to evaluate and grant access to a set of permissions. This year, we launched granular permissions, which enables app developers to request only the permissions their app needs to function. As an app manager, this means the process of approving and restricting apps should be more transparent and specific, so it's easier to quickly evaluate apps for permissions that don't meet your security standards and approve the ones that are compliant. In addition to permissions in Slack, we know it's also important to know and trust the app developer's own security practices, since apps are built using not just Slack APIs, but also the parent software APIs as well. Depending on your organization, you may have a set of non-starters for a SaaS product, like it must be HIPAA or FedRAMP compliant, or it must have certain ISO certificates. Or you might have security policies about data storage location and providers, or enforcing the use of SSO. This year, we recently added a new tab on the app listing in the app directory, which features a summary of all security and compliance information provided directly to us by the app developer. By surfacing this information in the app directory, we hope this will help you save time on app requests, allowing you to access critical security information about a developer all in one place. Now, I'd like to pass it off to Vivian from the security team to show how her team approaches security and permissions here at Slack.
Thanks, Salman. When reviewing apps for approval, our security team at Slack looks at several aspects. The first obvious one is the permissions that the app wants. What permissions does the app need in order to do the functions that it promises deliver? Does it need IAM read permissions, or could it work just fine with reactions read as an alternative? Does the design leverage only the minimum permissions needed? Just as we restrict access according to least privilege principles in our environment, we want to do the same thing with access to our Slack workspaces. We also consider the sensitivity of the content that's being accessed by the app. If the app has permission to read messages, will the messages contain fairly non-confidential information, like our fun lunch train app that rallies teams to get lunch together? Or is it handling customer triage requests with sensitive, confidential data? In short, what are the risks associated with the data being accessed? Ultimately, we're just trying to understand what are the risks associated if that data were to get into the hands of bad actors. And lastly, we consider who will be using the app. Sometimes we approve apps with sensitive permissions if the use will be restricted to only certain people or workspaces. We know that these permissions will not be expanded to other users, which means that we can allow something for a select group that we might not allow for everyone. For example, allowing our help desk team to have the access to direct messages can be very important, but we do not want that to apply to our CEO. It's also important that the people using the app know what the restrictions and expectations are. It's important to make sure that people remember what info can be shared and when and where. Today, I'm going to focus on the first question. What Slack permissions are being requested? And provide more context on how we evaluate the risk of apps based on those permissions. When you install an app, you issue a token that represents that app's set of permissions to your workspace when it makes an API call. It's helpful to know whether an app uses a bot or a user token, because it'll give you a high-level overview of what the app intends to do in your workspace. So first are bot tokens, and those are the most common type of token used in apps. They typically come with a lot of access, as they operate much like a human user account that can view everything. And that can sound scary, but also consider how much that means a bot can do. They're incredibly powerful for streamlining work processes and solving pain points. Like if you could hire another person to do a series of tasks that just kind of always falls between the cracks. On the security team, we're especially excited about the granular permissions that Salman mentioned earlier, because these allow the power of bot users, i.e. the ability to do some incredibly complex tasks, while also restricting the permissions in more targeted ways so that they only have access to the ability to do the tasks that they need to do, whereas before it was just a blanket permission. So then there's the user token. And this has a lot of associated permissions, such as users.profile, which allows reading or writing of profile information. We have a great integration with Workday, and that keeps everyone's job title and manager information synced in their profiles. This is so helpful for making sure that we're talking to the right person when we have questions for folks on other teams. Users.write, meanwhile, allows for the changing of someone's presence in the Slack client. So things like setting a status or turning on Do Not Disturb. This is great for tools like the Google Calendar integration, which will automatically set your status when you're in a meeting so that people know you're busy and aren't setting off a million notifications. I'm using that one right now. So once you have a grasp on the type of token being used, it's important to review what specific permissions being requested by the app and what those permissions mean for your workspace. There are a lot of permissions available. As Salman said before, but we can really never say this enough, you can review all of them at api.slack.com/scopes. And it will not only explain which scopes are associated with which permissions, but like what it really means to use those. So we're going to go over just some of the most common ones today. So the first category of data an app will ask for permission for is access to data about channels, which has the categories of read, write, and history. The read permission allows access to basic information and metadata about public channels. So in this example, that means things like the name of the channel, that there are 21 members in it, there's one pinned item, and the purpose, which is about tracking and coordinating social media. So channels read, that's what you get, just the information about the channel. The writing permission means that the app can manage public channels, which includes the ability to create a new one on a user's behalf. That might sound weird or scary. Is this app just going to start creating random channels and filling up my workspace? Well, our sales and customer success teams have channels for each customer in order to keep that information both separate from other customers and also organized and readily accessible for them. So wouldn't it be great to be able to change the status of a company from lead to customer in your CRM and have a channel get created with all of the relevant parties and information? Very convenient. The history attribute is where the app is able to then view the messages and contents of any channel it has been added to. This is where the data might be. So history is the one that I personally always give a second look when I'm reviewing. So going back to our example where the app could see the number of members and pin posts and so on, now our app can see Sarah giving a shout out to Zoe and Zoe's response. While that example might not be sensitive content, other things in the channel might be. So you want to consider the implication. And channel read or channel history permissions are given on a channel by channel basis. So do be aware that you can restrict which channels are accessed. Now, naturally, we'd want to consider the permissions that involve access to the messages being sent in Slack, because communication is where the magic happens. Similarly to the channels permission, reading with chat, conversations, and IM, that just means viewing the basic metadata, such as who is involved in a conversation. Writing allows posting into that conversation, either as an app or on behalf of a user. And then there's the history permission, where the app can view the content and messages, including going back in the history. That's so powerful and valuable for many apps, such as our previously mentioned help desk app that we use at Slack. But it can also be scary. This is where we really try to think about context. Say your investors relation team is posting updates of business metrics for the C-suite team only, while your investor relations team is really posting information to the C-suite team and also any app with the history permission in that channel. So, on the other hand, when a colleague invites you to lunch through the Lunch Train app, that's not highly confidential, assuming you aren't plotting anything. So considering context is very important. We don't think of scopes as good or bad, we think of them as contextual. So we also like to check out what information is being accessed about who a person is in Slack. The identity permission does exactly what it says on the packaging. It gives access to identity-related information. That can include things like email addresses, full names, team names, membership, and pictures. In some cases, this isn't sensitive, but for other organizations, it is. I personally would like to share my dog with every person that I ever interact with in Slack, even if they're coming into a shared channel from another organization. Some organizations are highly regulated and they don't necessarily want to be allowing that kind of information. So when you have shared channels, this is a particularly good one to be thoughtful about. And finally, it's helpful to know an app is really just an incoming webhook, because they simply post information into a channel from a webhook. This flow is one way, so no data is moving outward. This is great for piping in alerts and updates, or you can use it like an RSS feed into a channel. We use all of these uses on the security team, and it's extremely valuable for helping us be on top of information, keep aware of what's going on, and just generally share knowledge with each other. However, it's really important to make sure that you trust that webhook so that it isn't piping questionable data or phishing links into your corporate workspace. So here it's less a question of the permission and more what is the origin of this webhook. You may have been waiting for me to tell you exactly what to avoid, but as you might have noticed, we feel very strongly that we don't want to prescribe the best way to manage your corporate Slack workspace. Every team is different, and our objective today is to equip you with the knowledge to properly customize your approach to match your organization. With that spirit in mind, here are some general best practices that we on Slack's security team use to minimize risk and streamline the app request process. First off, we have the app request process. You can set in your workspace controls that apps cannot be installed by anyone other than administrators with the approval rights, and otherwise they request. So we have a great request flow that goes into a channel. So first, we try to minimize the repetition of apps. By not installing lots of apps that all serve the same purpose, we keep our threat surface from growing unnecessarily. There are lots of apps that can manage a to-do list, integrate with a calendar, or take polls. We identified the specific ones that work best for our organization, and we stick with those. Sometimes someone wants to install an app that's in a category we've already got covered. We'll ask them if they have a compelling reason, and that does happen. Sometimes there's a very specific functionality or use case. So it's important to have wiggle room to meet the needs of your users. We do our best to anticipate them, but if there's one thing that we know in security, it's that sometimes you just have to adapt to what your users need. Secondly, we think Enterprise Grid is a great tool for maximizing the security of your apps. At Slack, we use our grid workspaces to separate out our apps by need. We silo our information and restrict permissions based on need to know everywhere else in our organization. So of course, we take the same approach with our workspaces and our app integrations. Some apps should be in every workspace, but that's not always the case. The people who need access to Zendesk might not need access to Salesforce, and the people who need access to Salesforce might not need access to GitHub. So we integrate apps only into the workspace pillars where they'll be needed, thus keeping everything fenced and organized. It also helps to protect against zombie apps that are lurking in our infrastructure, unused and unmonitored. However, we don't want to be draconian about rejecting apps that are a little more fun, but also maybe a little less trustworthy. So we have a social workspace on our grid where we can share our animal pictures, lots of my dog there, make dad jokes, and of course discuss the finer points of mechanical keyboards. We love letting our colleagues install all kinds of lighthearted apps on the social workspace so that we can have fun and have some social bonding. But also, we on the security team do not have to continue dying over gray hairs. And finally, a great way to reduce your workload as an app approval person is to create and socialize a frequently asked question document with guiding principles for apps. If users already know what they might or might not be allowed to install, you'll get better requests. For example, if you've decided to restrict any permissions as absolutely non-starters, what are they? Let the users know and let them know why so that they understand it's just not going to be a discussion. And what about if you're on Enterprise Grid? Are there different standards for different grid workspaces? Let folks know about requesting apps only in the appropriate workspaces. And you can also give guidelines about what they should look for when they're considering those apps. You might tell them about trusted developers that they can start with, any collaborators, or maybe specific things to look for in the settings or the terms and conditions, and particularly in that wonderful new security and compliance tab that Salman mentioned. So with clear guide rails that reflect your security posture, you can move quicker as an app management team when approving or denying requests. So now I'll pass it back to Salman to talk through the next area of app management, and that's governance.
Now, Vivian just shared a bunch of best practices that help you formulate a strategy for app requests. The next natural question is, how do you operationalize that process in a way that's both scalable and efficient? It's helpful to start by zooming out and considering what type of governance you want to apply to app management. For example, should a decision be made top-down, set by org admins and owners to apply across all workspaces in the organization? Or is it better for this decision to be approached from bottoms up, where you delegate responsibility to each individual workspace admin who may have more context about individual workspace decisions? Each organization will have a different point of view on how to approach decision-making to protect their organization. So there's really no right answer. In fact, we've seen many organizations apply a hybrid approach where some decisions are made top-down and others are made more bottoms-up. I'm going to take the next few minutes to share a few of the product features that you can leverage as you design your own app approvals process. First, we have a dashboard for org-wide app approvals, built specifically for grid admins who are managing apps across multiple workspaces. This dashboard is designed to streamline the process of reviewing app approvals and allowing admins to approve or restrict apps in bulk across the entire organization. This should hopefully decrease how much time is spent managing a queue of requests, while also giving org admins like yourself a bird's eye view of what apps are requested, restricted, and being approved all in one place. With that broad purview, you can quickly gut check that the proper app management practices are being enforced across your org. We also know some admins who have a more nuanced criteria for app approvals or simply want to further optimize the app approvals process. That's why we launched the admin APIs for app management, which provide the infrastructure to build a custom app that automates parts or all of the app approval process. Using these APIs, a developer can define criteria and set rules to automate app approvals and rejections across all workspaces in a grid organization. Once you have that playbook of rules for app management in your organization, the APIs will give you the ability to action on those rules and architect a custom solution based on your specific needs. For example, customers have used the API to route app requests to a third-party ticketing system, automatically deny any apps that request certain permissions, or route app requests through complex, custom, and individual workflows. We know not everyone has the resources internally to build a custom app. So if you're looking to hire a developer, we recently launched a new services partner program with a few highly qualified companies who can help you build a solution with our APIs. Once you build a business case for an internal app, these partners are trusted vendors you know have been vetted by Slack to work with our customers. You can find more information about our partners at slack.com/partners. To complement the org-wide app approvals dashboard, we're super excited to launch org-wide app deployment, a feature I know many of you have all been waiting for. A centralized way for org admins and owners to install apps across some or all workspaces in your grid org. With this feature, org admins can distribute apps more efficiently and automatically give all employees access to key apps, especially ones that are used every day, like a file management, calendar, and calling app. One of the major benefits of org-wide app deployment is that once an app is installed at the org level, an admin can choose to make the app available to just certain specific workspaces, all of your existing workspaces, or even all existing as well as all future workspaces. This allows you to standardize how apps are used in your organization, setting up a default set of apps for new and existing employees to have access to. We're excited to roll out org-wide app deployment later this year with the following first-to-market apps. While org-wide app deployment is going to be super impactful for all of our apps, there are two main use cases that we know admins are super keen for. First off, you'll be able to easily deploy essential apps that almost all employees use on a daily basis. For example, WebEx or Box are often used across the company for calling and file management. On the other hand, there's value in being able to deploy apps with rich context to help teams make informed decisions, increase visibility, and stay aligned. For example, Salesforce has critical customer data that cross-functional teams across sales, finance, legal, and engineering could all benefit from. There will be a lot more to come around the org-wide app deployment when we launch later this year, so keep your eyes open for that. Now, I'll pass it back to Vivian to share best practices on app governance.
All right, thank you. So we have a small but very mighty team of people at Slack who help manage our app requests. I briefly mentioned that earlier, and now we're going to go into that a little more in depth. So in order to make the process as smooth as possible, we really needed to answer three primary questions. And that is first, where are app requests routed? Secondly, who's triaging those requests? And lastly, and most importantly, how are escalations handled? So at Slack, any user can go to the app directory and request an app, but they can't just install it. That request gets piped into our Please Apps channel. We use specific prefixes at Slack for our channel names. It's a great way to keep track, and Please is the requests prefix. So anyone that goes into that channel knows this is where they make requests of the apps team. So there, our app managers can thread conversations with the person requesting the app to ask questions about the request, such as why do you want it, tell us a little bit more about the use case, what will it be handling, that kind of thing. And then we can make the appropriate approval or denial of installation right from the Slack message through a nice little button. It's a really useful centralized place where people can keep track of app installations. We've also chosen to have just our BizTech team search as app managers across the organization, which means that they can review any app request regardless of what workspace it's being requested from. Having this approval flow lets us control what apps are installed, and it lets us have that workspace by workspace approval that I mentioned. So when it comes to escalations, we have a clear process laid out in a decision tree, aligning with key stakeholders like us on security and our BizTech operations on roles and responsibilities. So this empowers app managers to make decisions autonomously, but also relying on our escalation process for any edge cases. So that way, when the BizTech team goes, oh, I'm unsure about this permission, I don't know if this use case makes sense, they can reach out to me on security and I give it a little more of an in-depth review and we figure out what's going to be our best course of action so that they don't feel responsible for making decisions that they aren't equipped for. But most of the time, they have this guidance and this flow and they can just run with it. So I really recommend that you take the time to build out a source of truth like this, because that way everyone's on the same page and everything is just much easier for them. So I'm going to pass back to Salman to talk about driving adoption of these apps that you are so eager to approve.
Thanks, Vivian. As you can see, there's some foundational work you can do to scale your app management process. It takes a lot of time and effort for your team to review and approve these apps. So once they're installed in your organization, you also want to make sure it's actually being used. One of the biggest blockers to adoption is that an app is available, but a user simply hasn't authenticated their account with the app. Specifically for apps that deal with user-level data, users need to explicitly grant the app permissions to individual account details in order to function. For example, on the left-hand side of this slide, you see Vivian's user calendar is set up and authenticated to her specific Google Calendar account. On the right-hand side of this slide, you'll see my view of the Google Calendar app, where I'm told that I need to connect my Google Calendar account in order to use the app. In order to jump past this authentication hurdle, we recently launched a feature called domain-wide authentication. With the help of your Office 365 or G Suite admin, you can automatically authenticate all users' accounts with Google Calendar or Outlook Calendar app in a few clicks. This allows you to take on the heavy lifting of setting up the app for all of your users' benefit. Once you've set up domain-wide authentication, each user will receive a series of onboarding tips around how to use the app. By automating the education process, you won't need to spend as much time hand-holding users on how to get started with the app. The biggest impact you'll see is simply adoption at scale. SoFi is an early adopter of this feature and saw an astronomical increase in adoption of the Google Calendar app, experiencing a 790% increase in weekly active Google Calendar users. With more calendars connected to Slack, users can spend more time on getting work done and less time toggling back and forth between their calendar. Building out domain-wide authentication for calendar apps is just the start. We're also focusing on building this feature for other essential tools like OneDrive and Google Drive in the upcoming months. And we're working on ways to make this available for all of our apps in the future. Now, I'd like to pass it back to Vivian to share best practices on how our business technology team drives adoption of apps in Slack.
All right, here we go. It is no surprise that we look to drive adoption of our Slack apps right in Slack. So first, we created a channel called BizTech Tools to share key updates on our portfolio of tools. This makes sure everyone knows about the cool apps that are now available to them and how to get started. Then we create Slack user groups comprised of licensed users of a specific tool who really like it. And so here you see an example of a message sent to Dropbox users. We created a user group called Dropbox Best Users to classify a set of users that we know would find our announcements useful. So in this message, we shared a targeted announcement about the latest Dropbox integration, so these users know that it's available and how to get started. This model also works great if you're looking to share best practices to users on how to get more out of an app. For example, here you see a message targeted to poly users on how to send a poll effectively, including links to additional resources. This allows users to get what they actually want from the app, which is to get meaningful responses from the polls. So now I'm going to pass back to Salman.
Now, I know that was a lot of information all at once. So before we get into the Q&A, I wanted to give you a quick recap of the session and suggest some resources to get started. When it comes to managing apps, you can carve out a strategy based on your security, governance, and adoption needs. I shared a number of features that help you in each of these key areas, all designed to help you build a strong foundation for managing apps. It's a win-win for everyone. Users have the flexibility to integrate their tools, whereas admins like yourself can maintain control and security over how apps operate within your organization. To learn more, here are a few resources that can help you get started on your app management journey. Our Help Center has tactical step-by-step guides for how to manage apps, while our admin guide to app management is a more high-level resource and serves as a great primer for setting your organization strategy. With that being said, I'd like to now open the floor for a live Q&A session where you're welcome to ask questions or share feedback with both Vivian and I. Thank you so much.